Hello. In my last lecture, we discussed about the nature of bad leadership. We discussed the dark side of leadership. Specifically, we discussed Barbara Kellerman's model of bad leadership, where she describes 7 different types of bad leaders. We discussed other typologies as well that were proposed by other researchers. Now, all these models, all these typologies provided us some insights about the nature of bad leadership. For example, we know some bad leaders are uncaring. They do not care about their followers or for their community. Then there are other leaders who are incompetent. They may lack the ability or skill to make the right kind of decisions. Then there were leaders who were, let's say, very rigid, due to which they again became bad leaders, ineffective leaders. Some leaders lacked self-control, which then again led to their derailment. Now, we could discuss these points as causes of bad leadership, or we could also describe them as the nature of bad leadership, right? So, for example, when we are saying that somebody is uncaring, that's the reason he or she is a bad leader. That's fair to say that, but that's still a little incomplete answer, because we can also ask, why is somebody uncaring? So then we are diving deeper into the cause of bad leadership. So in this lecture, we are trying to make that deeper dive into the nature of bad leadership. Essentially, we are asking this question: why do some people become bad leaders? Why do some people not become bad leaders, right? So we did answer this question in the first video, but we did not dive deep enough. Here we are trying to take a deeper dive by asking the logically the logical sequence of questions, right? In other words, when we are saying a bad leader is a bad leader because he is uncaring or he is evil, then we have to ask the next logical set of questions. Why is somebody uncaring? Why is somebody evil? Why is somebody incompetent? So we are trying to take a deeper dive. And when we are doing that, we may go into the motivational mechanisms, the personality traits that contribute to somebody being uncaring or rigid, or the kind of decision-making fallacies that again create bad leaders. So we are essentially making a deeper dive into unethical leadership, into bad leadership in this video. In this slide, we have the broad overview of the different causes of bad leadership. So we have different unhealthy motivations that lead to bad leadership. We have the different kind of personality traits or personality trait combinations that lead to bad leadership, and so on and so forth. The faulty decision making mental models that leaders may have, or even the lack of sufficient amount of ethical training, ethical expertise that could lead to bad leadership, and other factors. The last factor is a little different from the remaining 6 factors that are listed here, because in the last factor we are talking about the contextual factors, factors outside the leader. The first 6 factors tend to focus more on factors within the leader, either because of lack of motivation or lack of personality, or certain personality traits contributing to unethical leadership, or lack of ethical training or skill, all those factors, right? But in the last point that is listed here, we are talking about factors outside the leader, how the group or the nature of the organization, how followers, those factors can also contribute to bad leadership. Again, we did touch upon this in our previous video as well, where we talked about the different challenges that followers have, right? Followers also need to voice their ethical concerns, but again, they need to balance it because they always should not be complaining either. They should not be cynical individuals either. So all those balancing act that followers need to do to maintain good leadership in organizations. So those are the kind of factors that come into play when we are talking about the contextual factors. In any case, we will go through each of these shadow casters, as your textbook describes them in greater detail, as we move through the remaining slides. So here's the list of unhealthy motivations that your textbook talks about, how these motivational factors contribute to bad leadership, to unethical leadership. The first point that they talk about is insecurity. So leaders can be extremely insecure individuals. Just because somebody is in a high position of authority, high position of leadership, does not mean that they are not insecure individuals. In fact, sometimes they may be much more insecure than the average Joe. But this is not what we typically think of when we think of leaders. We think they are all very secure individuals, right? But they may also suffer from self-doubt. After all, they are human beings, right? So a lot of this insecurity, even though your textbook doesn't go into all these details, may come from deep childhood experiences, or past failures, while being in different leadership positions, or even during schooling years, right? It could be from all kinds of experiences that the leader may have had until that point of time, which then could make him or her extremely insecure. And when you are insecure, you are likely to hold on to things, grab on to things, right? Or you may be willing to compromise on certain things to continue to retain your position as a leader, or you may again compromise on things to achieve the success that you want. So which you would not have done if you were well secured individual. So here we are talking about some deep psychological insecurity, how that could then cause people to become unethical. One thing that comes into mind here is imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome, if you have heard this term before, it's the phenomenon where individuals doubt their abilities. Even if they actually have the abilities to succeed, they may internally believe like they are frauds, that they will get caught once everyone knows that they lack the necessary ability. So none of us are perfect human beings. None of us are completely capable individuals. To reach a certain amount of ability, we have to work hard, right? So, but when we are talking about imposter syndrome, that hard work that leads us to greater abilities, greater capabilities, these people may think like that's a sign that they do not have the intrinsic ability to succeed, right? So in any case, imposter syndrome is again fairly common. It's probably more common amongst successful individuals. So while this insecurity could have helped them succeed in a way, because that may have prompted them to work even harder and reach the position that they do, but that deep underlying insecurity may still be there, which then could prompt them to take decisions which are not necessarily in the best interest of the followers and the organization. Now, insecurity could also come from external factors. Some organizations have intense amount of competition. That's the kind of culture that may exist, which then could make anyone in those organizations more insecure than they would have otherwise been. Or some leadership positions may involve huge amount of public scrutiny, which could again make you highly insecure. So again, even though your textbook doesn't go into all these details, I thought you should understand some of the deeper mechanisms through which insecurity may come into play, which then ultimately leads to you making questionable decisions, which ultimately either lead to your failure or derailment as a leader. So the next unhealthy motivation that your textbook talks about is the battleground mentality. So the battleground mentality is the idea of being extremely competitive. You are essentially seeing the whole world as a battleground, that you have to fight. The kind of metaphorical images that you may be having is that of military. So by hook or crook, you have to win. So that's the kind of mentality. And similar to the point that I was making before, it is this battleground mentality which may have actually helped these people achieve these high leadership positions, right? Because of this competitive mentality that they had, highly competitive mentality. But it has a flip side too. It has a dark side too. It can make people extremely hostile. So it then can lead such leaders to make decisions which are not necessarily in the best interest of the employees or of the overall community. This kind of mentality could lead you to succeed at all cost. This is something that we have seen in many organizations, like in a case of Enron. Even Steve Jobs comes into mind, which I mentioned in my last lecture. How he was a jerk when he was managing things, but again, this extremely highly competitive spirit also helped him succeed. So many of the factors that actually help people reach high leadership positions could also become the reasons why they fail, why they get derailed, because there is a dark side to these factors too, right? So the third point that we are talking about here is functional atheism. Now this phrase may seem a little confusing, but you all know what atheism is. Atheism is the belief that there is no God, right? So if you believe there is no God, that means you are responsible for whatever that happens in your life. That's the kind of mentality. So that is the functional atheism. So this is the belief that you are ultimately responsible for everything that happens to you or to your group or to your organization. Similar to the internal locus of control. Again, you would remember from my lectures that I have, various lectures that I've done on leadership, about how internal locus of control is a good thing and how it ultimately helps you succeed. But when we are talking about functional atheism, it is internal locus of control taken to the extreme, where you think you are solely responsible for everything that happens to your organization. And so it's opposite of the laissez-faire kind of leadership. So what happens when you think you have to control everything? You start micromanaging. You yourself become a workaholic. because you have to work hard. That's the only way you succeed, right? Which then could lead to burnout within yourself. But if you as a leader are an extreme workaholic, you will also encourage such kind of workaholism in your subordinates, which then would put extreme amount of stress pressure on them, and they leading to burnout. So this is the kind of um, mechanism through which, again, leaders fail. The fourth point being discussed here is fear. Now, fear and insecurity, they are essentially the same things. Fear is typically described as a more extreme form of insecurity. But in here, in your textbook's language, fear, they are talking more about a fear of chaos. So, which is similar to being extremely uncomfortable with uncertainty. So again, that then makes you everything structured as possible. You want everything to be rule bound. There should be procedures for everything, which again within limits works well. But then when you take it to the more extreme side, it leads to stifling of innovation, stifling of creativity, stifling of any kind of play within the organization, right? So the fear of chaos can be a major factor why your organization will not be innovative enough, or it does not stay innovative, which then ultimately leads to failure, because you have to continuously innovate. So that's about the fear of chaos, or again, as I said, so structure and chaos both have their importance. Structure has its importance. That's what like task oriented leaders do. They bring about structure. So chaos can be seen bad from that perspective, but one also needs to be comfortable with uncertainty, with any form of chaos, because in there happens a lot of creativity, happens a lot of innovation. So that balancing act is really critical in succeeding, in being effective as a leader. And when you slide into either of those extremes, it leads to failure, derailment. So the fifth point that is being talked about here is denying death. This I see again is very similar to the functional atheism. So we all know intellectually that one day we will all die, but we tend to live our lives as if we are going to live forever, right? So, but everything, including we human beings and the organizations that we create, they all come with an expiry date. So taking life a little easy is really important, where we are not completely caught up to succeed in whatever way possible. This reminds me of several meditation techniques that there exist across different cultures. In the Hindu culture, in the Buddhist culture, even in the Western philosophy, the Stoicism, the school of philosophy called Stoicism, they have a technique of meditation that is that focuses on meditating on death. So there is this phrase called memento mori. So you could die any moment, and that's what you consciously think about, consciously contemplate about, meditate on, and it brings some great perspective to life. You realize the futility of many things that you do when you do not have this consciousness of you or your organization dying anytime, then again, because of that extreme competitive mentality, trying to control everything, that functional atheism part, we tend to make all kinds of incorrect decisions. We tend to become over controlling, right? We sometimes need to let go of things a little bit easy. And so having this awareness, as again, it's impossible to have 24-hour awareness that we are going to die one day, but periodically, if we or maybe even on a daily basis, if we meditate about the possibility of death, that we may not exist tomorrow. So if today was the last day on our planet, how would we live? Are we going to stay as competitive as we always have been, or are we going to give more importance to compassion, to care? So again, when this strong motivation is there of denying death, it then messes us up. It derails us from a proper, wise approach to leading. So that's how denying death leads to we essentially taking things for granted and mindlessly pursuing the kind of goals that we do as a leader, or for that matter in our as a average individual also. This applies. So the last unhealthy motivation, broad category of motivation that they talk about, is evil. Now, where does evil come from, right? Anything we don't agree with, anything in extreme, we often call that evil. But if we talk about the underlying mechanisms why this happens, apart from many others, it's some of the underlying emotions, like envy, for instance. Envy is something that I have researched a lot. That was, in fact, the topic of my doctoral dissertation. So, envy. What is envy? So, you think somebody else has some capability that you lack in, and for you, having that capability is really important. That's what would increase your sense of self-worth, your self-esteem. So you resent this person for having that ability which you seem to be lacking, right? So there's a sense of resentment, there's a sense of bitterness. So envy can actually lead to hyper competitiveness. It can make you extremely hostile. It can make you take steps that are unethical. You want to cut short the other person, your competitor, just so that you can succeed. So it can potentially lead you to take extremely unethical actions. Now, again, like the other points, there can be a positive aspect of envy too, which is, in technical terms we call it benign envy. Where it can motivate you to become a better individual, become a better version of yourself, to work on yourself so that you become better. But when this envy is of a malicious form, instead of it motivating you to become a better individual, you try to cut the other person short, so that you can enjoy feeling better. So in any case, these are some of the complex motivational mechanisms through which people start slipping into the darker side of the psychology, darker side of leadership, darker side of life, that ultimately makes them ineffective, ultimately makes them unhappy individuals, ultimately create a lot of suffering uh, amongst people. Now that we have discussed how insecurity leads to bad leadership, or how hyper competitiveness, which we call battleground mentality, leads to bad leadership, we can ask the next logical question. So why do some people become hyper competitive? Why are some people highly insecure? Right? Those are the kind of questions that we could ask. So to answer that, we have to rely on certain theories. So you all are familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those of you who have taken my classes know there is the five uh, levels of hierarchy of needs. But in my lectures, I have also discussed the revised model of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where he adds more higher order needs beyond the self actualization needs. So, while the self actualization need was the highest level of need that one could discussed in the five level model, in the revised model, the transcendence needs is the highest level that one can reach. In any case, I will not discuss what Maslow's hierarchy of needs is. I presume that you all know it. So, what we will discuss here is how, what level of need you are functioning in impacts your insecurity or your competitiveness or your overall tendency to be unethical or immoral. So the basic conception is that the lower the level you are functioning in, like if you are functioning at the physiological needs, or like insecurity is similar to safety and security needs, right? So who will be most insecure? Individuals, those who are still functioning at the safety security kind of needs, at a psychological insecurity, right? So the lower level you are functioning in, the more insecure you will be, the more fearful you will be, the more competitive you will be. But if you are functioning at a higher level, like at the self actualization, where you're focused more on your own growth, you becoming a better version of yourself, as opposed to being envious of somebody else, right? So then, if you are functioning at these higher levels, or transcendence needs, where you're trying to make a difference to the world, if you are functioning at such higher levels, you will be less likely to become or engage in immoral acts. So we could still ask, why are people functioning at the lower levels more likely to engage in immoral acts or unethical behaviors? You see, there can be a sense of desperation. When your basic needs are not met, you may feel desperate, and not just desperate, you may feel justified to engage in ethically questionable behaviors. So there could almost be like a sense of entitlement. So my basic needs are not met. How come the other person is succeeding? You may feel like you got an unfair deal, and you may then feel entitled to steal from your company, let's say. So because you are functioning at this lower level of needs. And another thing is that when you are functioning at these lower level needs for a very long period of time, it could reduce the extent of empathy that you would have otherwise had. When you are so stuck up in your head, by the way, again, I'm talking about at a psychological needs level here. Even the physiological needs, your basic needs may still be getting met, but you think that's not enough, right? So you think the money that you're getting is not enough. So because of that, you are still stuck in the lowest level of need. So if that's where somebody is stuck up, then that's what you are constantly focused on. You are always in the survival mode, and you lose sight of the challenges, the difficulties that others may be going through. So you become less empathetic to the needs of others because you are stuck in the lack of needs in yours, the lack of what you need in your own life. So this is how unmet needs can promote or can potentially lead to unethical behavior. Again, this does not mean that anyone in the society who is functioning at a lower level automatically become corrupt or bad individuals, and those functioning at higher level needs are all saints. No, that's not the case. If that were the case, then all the rich people who have all their basic needs met should not be getting corrupt, should not be turning evil, right? So what we are talking about is psychologically where you are functioning. You may be an extremely rich individual, right? All your basic needs may have been met, but in your mind it is not enough. You think you need more money. You should be more successful than your neighbor. So you are still psychologically functioning at a lower level need. You are not functioning at the self-actualization, where one is focused more on becoming a better version of oneself. Or you are not functioning at the transcendence needs, where you stop thinking even about yourself in terms of bettering yourself. Rather, you are thinking of others, about the world, about the community, how you can help better the world. So anyway, this is how unmet needs can lead to immoral, unethical behaviors. So now that we understand how the level at which you're functioning contributes to whether you will be ethical or unethical, some of the additional small bits of points that your textbook talks about, and I would like to emphasize as well, is the self-centeredness part, right? So I've already discussed how when you are psychologically functioning at those lower level needs, you become too self-centered. You have difficulty empathizing with others, right? You are too focused on self. So, or you become too ego driven about how it is all about you succeeding, or both in the positive as well as in the negative direction. So excessive amount of self-centeredness, which is also described as narcissism. Narcissism can be a personality trait, which we will be talking about next in the next couple of slides. But here we are talking about narcissism more in terms of a motivational mechanism. You may not be technically a narcissist individual, but you may, if you are too focused on just the self, either in terms of your looks or in terms of your abilities. So hubris is also is the idea of somebody having excessive pride, right? Bordering on, not bordering, but equating arrogance. So having some amount of self-confidence is good, but being arrogant is not good. That messes you up. That makes you ineffective a leader. That leads to you faltering, making decisions that are not in the best interest of the organization or not in the best interest of your employees. So what happens when somebody is having excessive amount of pride. He or she is completely focused on the self, right? He or she has this idea that he or she has all the abilities that's needed to succeed. So that's overconfidence. And when you are overconfident, you are likely to make decisions that are that lead to failure. So that is something called overconfidence bias, because you disregard the opinions, for instance, of your important people in your organization. You are too confident in your own abilities. You again become very reckless. You take too risky decisions, which can then have potentially devastating consequences for the organization and for your people. And when your textbook talks about greed, again, you realize greed is functioning at those relatively lower levels of the hierarchy of needs. Psychologically, even if physically you have enough money to take care of your physical needs, but psychologically you are still stuck there. You want more money, right? Again, greed need not be about just money. It could be about more status, whatever it is. You just want more and more of it. So when you are stuck at those lower level of needs, as opposed to just bettering yourself as an individual, or trying to make a difference to the world, trying to give back to the world. If you do not have that kind of right perspective, then you do end up making more immoral decisions. That's the reason this mindfulness meditation, or death meditation, and different other types of meditations that there exist, or for that matter even journaling, all these techniques that I discuss in greater detail in my stress class, are also very helpful when it comes to making you a more effective leader. Why? Because it helps you bring a right perspective to things in your life, about the world. So you are less likely to have this tunnel vision of you needing to succeed at all cost. So you then tend to have much more balanced perspective, which then can help you not only succeed but sustain that success in your life. Now that we have discussed the motivational mechanisms through which bad leadership manifests in this world, we can now talk about the personality factors that contribute to bad leadership. Those of you who have attended my classes know my preference of discussing personality traits from the big five personality trait perspective, because that is the most researched, as well as that is where the maximum amount of research evidence exists. Now, if we talk about the big five personality traits, for example, somebody who is low on agreeableness is more likely to become uncaring, right? Because that's how agreeableness is defined. An agreeable individual is much more caring, much more supportive of an individual. Whereas somebody who is low on agreeableness temperamentally does not care for people, right? So similar things could be discussed for the other big five personality traits. Now, your textbook doesn't go into the big five personality traits. So rather, it focuses on some of the factors which are called the dark triad personality factors. Now, dark triad personality factors, when we are talking about, these are more factors that have been researched in clinical psychology. So there are essentially three main dark personality disorders. So technically, if somebody is in extreme of any of these things, they fall into this dark triad. But we can talk about dark triad as personality disorders, where somebody is clinically narcissistic or clinically Machiavellian or clinically a psychopath. Or we can talk about these three factors also as personality traits, right? So here I'm talking about these three factors again more as personality traits. And so we'll start with narcissism. Narcissism is an extreme form of focus on the self. So in the motivational mechanisms, we were talking about how self-centeredness, due to you functioning at lower level of needs or not, or having many unmet needs, become more self-centered. So there it was more of a motivational mechanism through which you become self-centered. Here again, when we are talking about narcissism, you are extremely self-centered. But we are not just talking about some temporary unmet needs due to which you have become more self-centered. This is how your temperament is. This is how your personality trait is. That's what we are talking about here. So people who are high on the narcissistic dimension, they are extremely focused on their own self. The term narcissism, of course, comes from the Greek mythology or fable of the character Narcissus, right? Who was a very handsome individual, and he falls in love with his own image that he sees in the indoor swimming pool that he has. That he stops eating and anything, but just is completely absorbed in the image that he sees of himself. The same thing happens in the psychological world of narcissists, right? They have an exaggerated sense of self-importance. So what will happen if you are so self-centered? If you think you are the absolute best in the world. Of course, there are many variations of narcissism. I'm not going into those details here. Sometimes, there can also be narcissists who think they are not as good, but I won't go into those details. The important thing is that they, irrespective of the type of narcissism that you may have, all these types have complete focus on the self, right? So, when you are completely focused on the self, you are not empathetic towards others' needs, which is something that I've already discussed. But here it is becoming even more extreme. So you don't care for others anymore. So it's as if the entire world functions around you. You demand admiration from people. You demand attention from people. When people are working for you, you feel like they are working for you. They are not working with you, right? It's so everything that you do, the entire world seems to be revolving around you in your mind. So because of that, you become less empathetic towards others. You become less caring towards others. You may even become more angry. If because you are so focused on yourself, if any of your need is not being met, you become extremely angry. Any of your need gets frustrated, you may burst into anger, because again you are so focused on your own self. And it could also make you more manipulative, exploitative. You want that admiration at any cost. You will manipulate individuals so that you get that admiration. You can exploit individuals because because of that heavy self-centeredness, you don't care so much about others. They have to be functioning for you. So this is how it leads to you becoming more of a bad leader. So again, low to moderate level of narcissism can potentially help you succeed When you're so focused on yourself, you focus on, let's say, wearing better clothes, dressing up well, putting up a better image about yourself, or working on your own improvement. So when you have relatively lower to moderate levels of narcissism, it can help you succeed or attain positions of leadership. But when you have high levels of narcissism, that same things start working against you, and ultimately it leads to major disasters. You alienate people. You stop caring for your followers, so the followers stop caring for you. The followers may start quitting the organization, and because you are so self-centered, you don't take into account all the factors that needs to be taken into account for an organization to succeed. You are so focused on yourself, so ultimately it leads to failure. So after narcissism comes Machiavellianism. Again, this could be considered a personality trait or a personality disorder. Personality disorder would be somebody clinically diagnosed as Machiavellian. If we are talking about the personality trait of Machiavellianism, again, somebody may be relatively high or relatively low on Machiavellianism. Either way, this is also one of the dark triad personality factors. So what happens in Machiavellianism? By the way, the term comes from a historical person named Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote this book called The Prince, about how you could enhance the power that you have, or how you can retain the power you have through all kinds of manipulations. That's what the book is primarily about. And so the term Machiavellianism is also focused on an excessively strong desire for power. And then people who are extremely high or are high on the Machiavellianism trait, they tend to be extremely manipulative to achieve their ends, what they want, by hook or crook. They will try to manipulate and get what they want. So even narcissistic individuals can be manipulative, but the key difference here is that the narcissistic individuals, they have a stronger need for attention, for validation, for admiration, and to get that, they become manipulative. But when we are talking about Machiavellian individuals, we are talking about people who have strong need for power. So these are individuals who want to be extremely powerful, and to rise up the power hierarchy or to retain the power that they have, they become more exploitative, they become more manipulative. But the manipulative aspect is more pronounced in the Machiavellian leadership. And you can imagine why these people will be more unethical, because they want power and to retain their power under any conditions. So power becomes an end in itself. Again, you have heard me in my previous lectures about the importance of power, how without power there can be no leadership. But when we are talking about power, that way we are seeing power as a means to influence others. When power becomes an end in itself, then everything else is there to serve the power that you want to attain. And that's what Machiavellianism is, and that's how it leads to all kinds of unethical behavior. The last factor in the dark triad is psychopathy. And when we are talking about psychopathy, these are people who lack any form of conscience, especially if we are talking about the clinical disorder of psychopathy. If we are talking about the personality trait, again, some could be more strongly psychopathic, some could be relatively less psychopathic. So it becomes a personality trait like any of the other big five personality traits. In any case, if you are higher on the psychopathy scale, then you are essentially incapable of even feeling emotions. So narcissistic individuals, they feel emotions. That's the reason they seek validation. They seek attention from others. That feels good to them. Psychopathic individuals, in a way, in the extreme sense, they just don't feel anything. They and feelings, emotions are a critical component of why we engage in ethical behavior, right? If we do not feel anything, then we won't even feel guilt. We won't even have any remorse when we do anything incorrect. If, like in movies, you have seen psychopathic individuals killing somebody without any remorse. Again, if you don't feel, you if you don't feel any guilt or remorse, you just go kill. So they lack conscience. They lack complete empathy. They without any remorse. And another thing that we tend to see amongst psychopathic individuals is complete disregard of the social norms. Again, social norms play a big role in ethical behavior. We sometimes social norms itself could be unethical, right? But most of the social norms tend to be such that they create more they tend to promote more ethical behavior in ourselves, so that the society could function optimally, right? So if somebody doesn't care at all about the social norms, that then leads to unethical behavior. Anyway, in this video, we could have discussed the other factors as well, but I think I will make a part 2 of that video where we discuss the decision-making faults and the contextual factors, how those factors contribute to bad leadership. But since it is almost, I think, close to an hour mark or maybe 50 minutes mark, so we will stop the video here.